some passengers never really leave your car, and I learned that the hard way when mine started driving itself to the cemetery every night at 3:17 a.m. Javier had been driving for rideshare for 3 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the night shift could throw at him. Drunk college kids, crying divorcees, the occasional businessman, too tired to keep his eyes open. All of them had stories. All of them left something behind in his silver Honda Civic, a hair tie, the lingering smell of cheap cologne, sometimes a forgotten phone that would buzz until morning. But none of them had ever left behind what she did. It was a Tuesday in October when the request came through at 11:47 p.m. The pickup location was downtown, outside the old Meridian Hotel that had been abandoned for 6 years. Javier almost declined the ride. Nothing good ever happened at the Meridian, but rent was due in 2 days, and late-night fares paid double surge pricing. The woman was waiting exactly where the app said she'd be, standing under the single working streetlight in front of the hotel's boarded-up entrance. Even from 50 feet away, Javier could tell something was off about her. She stood perfectly still, unnaturally so, like a photograph that had been dropped into the real world. Her long black dress seemed to absorb the yellow streetlight rather than reflect it, and her skin was so pale it almost seemed to glow. Javier pulled up to the curb and rolled down his passenger window. "Hey, Sarah," he called out, reading the name from his phone. The woman turned toward him, and that's when he got his first real look at her face. Her features were sharp and delicate, like they'd been carved from marble, but her eyes were completely black, no whites. No pupils, just endless, dark pools that seemed to drink in the light around them. When she smiled, her lips didn't quite reach her eyes. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming." She moved toward the car with fluid, gliding steps that didn't seem to disturb the dead leaves scattered across the sidewalk. When she opened the rear door, a wave of cold air rushed into the vehicle, along with the overwhelming scent of jasmine and something else, something sweet and cloying that reminded Javier of funeral flowers. "Where to?" Javier asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he adjusted his rearview mirror. In the reflection, he could see her sitting perfectly upright in the center of the back seat, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead with those impossible black eyes. "Willowbrook Cemetery," she said. "Section 7. Javier's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd driven people to cemeteries before, usually grieving relatives, making late-night visits, but something about this felt different. "That's going to be about a 20-minute drive. You sure that's where you want to go this late?" She didn't answer. When Javier glanced in the mirror again, she was still staring forward, but now her head was tilted slightly to one side, like she was listening to something he couldn't hear. The drive through the empty city streets felt endless. The woman never spoke, never moved, never even seemed to breathe. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional whisper of wind outside the windows. But the smell, that cloying, floral scent, grew stronger with each passing mile, till Javier had to crack his window just to keep from feeling sick. Halfway to the cemetery, his GPS started acting up. The screen flickered, and the route disappeared for a moment, before reappearing with a different path, one that would take them through the old industrial district where the streetlights had been broken for months. Javier started to mention it, but when he looked in the mirror, the woman was watching him with those black, bottomless eyes. "Take the suggested route," she said, her voice somehow both gentle and commanding. Against his better judgment, Javier followed the GPS through the maze of abandoned warehouses and empty lots. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, and more than once, he thought he saw shapes moving in the shadows between buildings, tall, pale figures that vanished the moment he tried to focus on them. When they finally reached Willowbrook Cemetery, the gates were closed and chained shut. Javier pulled up to the entrance and turned around to tell his passenger they had to find another way in, but the back seat was empty. The woman was gone. Javier sat there for a full minute, staring at the empty seat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The doors hadn't opened. He would have heard them, felt the car shift as she got out. But she was gone, as if she'd simply dissolved into the night air. The only evidence she'd ever been there was the smell, that sweet, heavy perfume that seemed to have soaked into the very fabric of his car. Javier drove home in a daze, trying to convince himself he'd imagined the whole thing. But when he checked his phone, the fare was there, $47.83, paid in cash that had somehow appeared in his console. And there was a 5-star rating with a single comment. Until next time. That was 3 weeks ago, and Javier hasn't been the same since. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., his car's GPS activates on its own and displays a route to Willowbrook Cemetery. The first few times, he thought it was a glitch. He deleted the app, reinstalled it, even took his phone to a repair shop. Nothing worked. But it's not just the GPS anymore. 2 nights ago, Javier woke up in his driveway at dawn, still in his pajamas, sitting behind the wheel of his car with the engine running. His gas tank was nearly empty, and there were 47 miles on his odometer that he couldn't account for. When he checked the GPS history, it showed he'd driven to Willowbrook Cemetery and back twice. The smell never goes away now, strongest in the back seat, right where she sat, but it's spreading. His apartment reeks of jasmine and decay. His clothes, his hair, even his food tastes like funeral flowers. And sometimes, when he's driving alone at night, Javier catches glimpses of her in his peripheral visions, sitting in that same spot in the back seat, watching him with those endless black eyes, waiting. The worst part is, he's starting to understand what she wants. Last night, his phone buzzed with a new ride request at 11:47 p.m. The pickup location was the Meridian Hotel. The passenger name was Sarah, and despite every instinct screaming at him to decline, despite the terror that's been eating him alive for 3 weeks, Javier found himself starting the engine and driving toward downtown. 'Cause some passengers never really leave your car, and some debts can only be paid in kind. Sometimes the most terrifying realization isn't that something wants to get inside your house. It's discovering that you've already let it in. Ethan had always prided himself on being a rational man. At 32, he worked as an IT specialist, dealt in facts and logic, and had little patience for ghost stories or urban legends. That confidence served him well until the night he learned that some horrors do uncare about your skepticism. The storm had been building all evening, October rain drumming against the windows of his 2-story colonial home. Ethan sat in his living room, laptop balanced on his knees, trying to finish a project that was due Monday morning. The steady patter of raindrops and occasional rumble of thunder created a soothing backdrop to his work. Buster, his 4-year-old golden retriever, had been restless all day. The dog kept pacing between rooms, whining softly and pawing at doors. Ethan assumed it was the approaching storm. Buster had never been fond of thunder. Around 9 o'clock, he'd let the dog out into the fenced backyard for his evening routine, despite the increasingly heavy rain. That was 2 hours ago. Ethan glanced at his watch and frowned. Buster usually scratched at the back door within 15 minutes, eager to return to his warm bed by the fireplace. The storm had intensified, and sheets of rain now lashed against the windows with violent force. Lightning illuminated the dark yard in brief, stark flashes. He was about to get up and check when he heard the familiar sound of claws scratching against wood. Buster's distinctive way of asking to come inside. 3 quick scratches, a pause, then 3 more. The sound came from the kitchen, where the back door led to the yard. "Coming, boy," Ethan called, closing his laptop and padding through the house in his socks. The scratching intensified as he approached, accompanied by a low, muffled whimpering. Poor dog was probably soaked and miserable. Ethan flicked on the porch light and peered through the glass panel beside the door. Rain obscured most of the view, but he could make out a familiar golden shape huddled against the door, He turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Buster immediately bounded inside, shaking water everywhere and leaving muddy paw prints on the tile floor. The dog was drenched, his usually fluffy coat plastered to his body, making him look smaller and more pitiful than usual. "Jesus, Buster, you're soaked," Ethan muttered, grabbing a towel from the laundry room. He knelt down and began drying the trembling animal. "What took you so long? You hate being wet." As he worked a towel over Buster's fur, something felt off. The dog was shivering more violently than usual, and his breathing seemed labored. When Ethan lifted the dog's head to dry his face, Buster's eyes looked strange wider than normal, with an almost glassy quality that made Ethan's stomach flutter with unease. "You okay, boy?" he asked softly, running his hand along Buster's flank. The dog's skin felt oddly cold, even accounting for the rain. That's when he heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound was coming from below, from the basement door at the far end of the kitchen. The same distinctive pattern. 3 quick scratches, a pause, then 3 more. Ethan's hand froze on the towel. His blood turned to ice water in his veins. The scratching came again, more insistent this time. It's the unmistakable sound of Buster's claws on wood, desperate and pleading. But Buster was right here, sitting perfectly still under Ethan's hands. Ethan looked down at the dog beside him. The animal was no longer shivering. In fact, it had gone completely motionless, its breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. Those glassy eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, focused on nothing. The scratching from the basement grew frantic now, accompanied by the muffled sound of barking, terraced, high-pitched, and terrified. "What the hell?" Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. He slowly stood up, never taking his eyes off the thing that looked like his dog. It remained perfectly still, like a statue, not panting, not moving, not even seeming to breathe, just sitting there with that horrible, vacant stare. The barking from the basement became more desperate, echoing through the floor. Ethan could hear his real dog down there, scratching and clawing at the door, trying to get out. But that was impossible. The basement door was always locked, and he kept the key on his keychain. There was no way Buster could have gotten down there, unless he'd never let Buster inside at all. Ethan's gaze drifted to the muddy paw prints on the kitchen floor. They led from the back door to where the thing sat, but looking at them now, something was wrong with their shape. They were too long, the claw marks too deep, as if whatever made them had been walking on its hind legs. The creature, because that's what it had to be, suddenly turned its head toward him. The movement was wrong, too fluid, rotating further than any dog's neck should allow. When it looked at him, Ethan saw that its eyes weren't just glassy, they were completely black, like pools of tar reflecting the kitchen light. Smiled. Dogs don't smile like that. Dogs don't pull their lips back to reveal rows of teeth that are too sharp, too numerous, stretching back into a throat that seemed to go on forever. The barking from the basement reached a fever pitch, mixed now with howls of pure terror. His real dog was down there somehow, and this thing was up here with him. Ethan backed toward the basement door, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his keys. The creature that wore Buster's shape rose slowly to its feet, movements unnaturally smooth. It began to follow him, its paws making wet, squelching sounds against the tile that were nothing like the click of dog claws. The basement key slipped in Ethan's sweaty fingers. Behind him, the real Buster's cries grew weaker, more desperate. In front of him, the thing tilted its head at an impossible angle, still wearing that horrible smile. "Good boy," it said in a voice like grinding glass. "Good boy, Ethan." The key finally found the lock. Ethan twisted it and yanked the door open. Buster, the real Buster, came tumbling up the stairs, fur matted with something dark, eyes wide with terror. The dog didn't stop to greet Ethan, didn't even slow down. He bolted straight through the kitchen and toward the front of the house, whimpering and leaving a trail of something that definitely wasn't water. Ethan spun around. The kitchen was empty. The back door stood wide open, rain still pouring in. Muddy prints led from where the creature had been sitting, across the floor and out into the storm. But these prints were different now, larger, with long gouges that looked more like fingers than paws. He slammed the back door and locked it, then ran through the house, checking every window, every entrance. Buster was hiding under the dining room table, shaking and refusing to come out. That was 3 months ago. Ethan moved out the next week and never went back. Heath told people it was because of a water leak, because explaining the truth would make him sound insane. But sometimes, late at night in his new apartment, he hears scratching at the door. 3 quick scratches, a pause, then 3 more. And when he looks through the peephole, there's nothing there but empty hallway. Though lately, he started to notice muddy prints appearing in the morning. Long, finger-like marks leading from his door to his bedroom while he sleeps. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't what enters your home. It's discovering what was already there, watching, waiting in plain sight. Liam's keys slipped from his fingers as he reached for his front door handle, the metallic clatter echoing off the empty porch. The door swung open at his touch and locked, despite his absolute certainty that he desecured it before leaving for his weekend camping trip with college friends. He stood, frozen in the doorway, listening. The house held that particular stillness of an empty home, yet something felt wrong. The air seemed heavier somehow, as if it had been disturbed and was still settling back into place. "Hello?" His voice cracked slightly. No response. Liam stepped inside, his hiking boots loud against the hardwood floor. Everything appeared normal. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter where he'd left it Friday morning. His mail lay undisturbed on the side table. Nothing seemed missing or out of place, yet the feeling of wrongness persisted like a low hum beneath his skin. He moved through each room methodically, checking closets and behind doors with the careful precision of someone who had watched too many horror movies. The basement was clear. The bedrooms were empty. Even his home office remained exactly as he'd left it. Laptop closed, papers stacked neatly. It wasn't until he returned to the living room that he noticed it. The family photos lining the mantelpiece caught his eye not because anything was missing, but because something was different. He approached slowly, a cold knot forming in his stomach. In the center photo from last Christmas, his entire family smiled at the camera. His parents, his sister Sarah, her husband Mike, and their 2 kids. But there, standing slightly behind his father's left shoulder, was a man Liam had never seen before. The stranger was tall and thin, with pale skin and dark hair. He wore a simple black sweater and stood perfectly still, while everyone else was caught mid-laugh or mid-smile. Most unsettling of all, while everyone else looked at the camera, the stranger's eyes seemed to be looking directly at Liam. Liam's hands trembled as he picked up the next photo of his college graduation from 2 years ago. There, in the background behind the crowd of celebrating families, stood the same man. Same black sweater, same pale skin, same piercing stare that seemed to follow Liam's gaze. One by one, Liam examined every photograph on the mantel. The stranger appeared in all of them. In some, he stood far in the background, almost blending into shadows. In others, he was closer, always watching, always perfectly still, while life moved around him. But this was impossible. Liam had taken most of these photos himself. He'd been there for every moment, captured. Birthdays, holidays, family dinners. He would have remembered this man. He would have noticed him. With growing panic, Liam rushed to the hallway where more family photos hung in neat rows. The stranger was there too, in every single one. Sometimes barely visible in a doorway. Other times standing among groups of people who seemed completely unaware of his presence. In a photo from Sarah's wedding 5 years ago, the man stood at the very back of the church, his pale face a stark contrast against the dark wood of the pews. In another from Liam's 10th birthday party, the stranger watched from behind a tree in the backyard. partially obscured by branches, but clearly visible if you knew where to look. Liam's breathing became shallow and rapid. He grabbed his phone and called Sarah, his sister. "Sarah, I need to ask you something weird," he said the moment she answered. "Do you remember a tall guy with dark hair at your wedding? He would have been wearing black, standing in the back." "Liam, what are you talking about? Are you okay? You sound? Just answer me, please." "A stranger in black at your wedding." Was a pause. "No, honey. I don't remember anyone like that." "Why?" Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. "What about Christmas last year? Is there anyone at Mom and Dad's that you didn't recognize?" "Liam, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He hung up and called his mother. "Mom, quick question. Do you have any photos from Christmas last year on your phone?" "Of course, sweetheart. Why?" "Can you look at the one with all of us by the tree and tell me if you see anyone you do want to recognize?" He heard the soft sounds of his mother scrolling through her phone. The silence stretched unbearably long. "No, dear. Just family. Are you feeling all right? You sound strange." Liam ended the call and stared at the photos surrounding him. In every single one, the stranger stared back, as if he'd always been there, as if he belonged. But no one else could see him. No one else remembered him. The house suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Liam realized that if this man could appear in photographs without anyone noticing, without anyone remembering, then what else might he be capable of? A floorboard creaked somewhere in the house. Liam spun around, his pulse thundering in his ears. The sound had come from upstairs, a slow, deliberate footstep. Then he looked back at the Christmas photo, at the stranger's pale face and dark eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. In the absolute silence that followed, Liam understood with crystal clarity that he was no longer alone in his house. And perhaps, he realized with growing horror, he never had been. The footsteps upstairs stopped directly above where he stood. And in the suffocating quiet, Liam could swear he heard someone breathing. And with that final story, we pull back from the abyss. For now, tales of ordinary lives brushing against the extraordinary, the terrifying, the unexplainable, from the shadow that mimics to the voice that calls from an empty house. We've seen tonight how thin the veil between our reality and a much darker one can be. These stories are not just fiction. They are born from real experiences, whispered in hushed tones, and shared to remind us that we are not always alone. And that's the most chilling thought, isn't it? Perhaps one of tonight's stories reminded you of something that happened to you, or to someone you know. A strange occurrence you've tried to forget. A noise in the night you rationalized away. A figure you saw for just a second. The details of your own brush with the darkness are what give this channel life. I invite you to leave your own story in the comments below. Let us know what you've seen in the shadows. If these stories sent a shiver down your spine, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps these tales reach others who need a reminder to check their locks at night. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. We have so many more stories to share, and you won't want to be left in the dark. Until next time, remember that you are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of the bone-deep certainty that you are not.